Can I have your attention? Thank you all for coming today. Very pleased that we have a special speaker who will be addressing a topic of concern in the area, certainly in Louisville and Commonwealth as well. Dr. Jennifer Middleton, who is an associate professor at King's School of Social Work. She has a special background in the topic today as the director of UFL Trafficking Research. She's also principal investigator for the Children's Justice Act Task Force Grant for prevention and intervention of victims of trafficking. Project. Principal investigator of Project STAAR, which we'll be talking specifically today. Co-chair of the Louisville Metro Human Traffic Task Force and director of Trauma Resilient Initiative. So lots of different things going on in Jennifer's background. She's a very busy person. Especially pleased that she took time to address this important topic today.
Thank you. I am honored to be here, and I wanted to add a little bit to my background so you can understand my connection to this project. I used to work, before I went back to get my PhD, I used to work as a forensic social worker, and I was a forensic interviewer. So I worked in child advocacy centers interviewing children who were alleged victims of primarily child sexual abuse, but also exploitation and trafficking. And I worked in Colorado. And I had a case that involved an 8-year-old girl who had been sold by her mother, repeated to a number of different buyers over the years. So when she actually came to me, she was 12. And she, rather than testifying, because it was too traumatizing for her to continue to testify cases, was able to be forensically interviewed at the child advocacy center, re-serving as both terms. So she came in, we did the interview in a child-friendly setting, but I actually had a little bug in my ear asking the questions for the two attorneys on the side of the case. And it was quite an ordeal for her because the suspect in the case, when he showed up to the child advocacy center, actually fled for the first time when we scheduled fled to Costa Rica. So we had to reschedule several months later when they found him and brought him back. And when we conducted the interview, she knew the circumstances. She'd actually testified many times over the court to details of other buyers who had purchased her for sex. But when I interviewed her, she knew this was her last time. This was the last case that she was talking about experience. And at the end of the interview, when we finished, she asked me, "Are we done?" I said, "We are done." And she stood up. She looked right in the camera. We had a visible camera in the interview. We explained all of that to the camera. And she looked straight in the camera and she said, "Today's the day. Today's the day I stopped being and I started being a survivor." And she marched right out of that room, went on, and actually was like a wonderful life. Now she was involved too. So she really has inspired me. I take a lot of transformational moving from work, from my clinical work, as well as in research. I'm really connected to this topic in ways. And so it's really my honor to be here. And I also want to just mention, and I'll probably say this again here, I'm actually just the messenger. The survivors are the artists, the photographers that contributed to what we're going to talk about today and what we're going to do today. Before I jump in to talk about Project STAR, I wanted to point out this is very much a team effort. So we had a number of community partners, funding partners, and a state partner who were directly involved in the development of our initial proposal. This proposal was primarily funded through the University of Louisville through the Consortium for Interdisciplinary Social Justice Research, as well as the UC additional supplemental grant that came through a gender studies. Our two primary community partners were the Christy Love Foundation, located in West Louisville, and the Center for Women and Families, specifically their human trafficking program that they had at the time we started this research study. Our state partner is the Kentucky Office for the Attorney General, So Attorney General Andy Beshear actually is very much aware of this project. It's now a 3-year project. We've been extended for 3rd year funding. So we're now really digging into some of the data and some additional findings that we have from conversations with the survivors to help inform investigations and prevention across the state. That's a really exciting job, the project that we'll see later this year. And then we had a number of contributors. Back on the cover page on the title slide, you saw that Dr. Maurice Gaddis is also a co-investigator for Project STAR. Dr. Leslie Harris as well is a co-investigator for Project STAR, and they're both at the Kent School of Social Work. They're wonderful colleagues of mine. We had several graduate students, one doctoral student, Julie Thompson, two graduate doctoral students, Jamie Thompson and Melissa Middleton, no relation, and then Ashley Lang is a practical student that works with me at the Bell Human Trafficking Research Initiative. They did a lot of the work pulling the photos together and matching the quotes with photos. So I think they did just an incredible job really maintaining the survivors and to make sure that my talk about this work. So a question for you all. How many of you have participated in a human trafficking training presentation? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, about 4 hands. Okay, great. And how many of you have heard of human trafficking? Okay, just about everyone in the room has raised their hand. And how many of you think that it's happening here in Florida? So there's some awareness there. How many of you feel like you know what to look for and you would know what to do if you saw the signs or red flags? About 4 or 5 of you, maybe, okay. And so I'm going to present a little bit of background information, prepare you for the film, show the film. It's about 20 minutes and is actually intentionally shown in silence, and I'll explain why the survivors wanted it to be distributed and shared that way. But then I've left time intentionally after the film for us to really process and discuss what we saw, how that impacted us, and all of the different messages that we conveyed in the film. And then there might be a little time to share a little bit about what some of our next steps are. But in the film is actually included the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. It's a number that I recommend to every program into their phone. So if we don't get to that earlier at the end, I'll make sure that you are equipped to respond. I do want to add just a little caveat that this is not technically a human trafficking training. I really am presenting the research and the art that comes from our survivors of child and sex trafficking in the local area. So it really is intended to contextualize the complex narratives of the survivors, create awareness, and also hopefully to address stigma around this issue in our community. But I won't necessarily be going through a human trafficking 1-on-1 training. However, if you're interested after seeing the film and learning more about how you receive training, we have a number of wonderful community partners who offer that for free. You can come into their programs or their schools or organizations. So human trafficking is actually a really big issue, as many of you are aware, throughout the world. It's the fastest growing criminal industry in the world, and it generates at least $9.5 billion in the United States. The vast majority of identified sex trafficking victims have been women and girls, based on what we currently know, and this is, of course, a challenging population. So research on this is very much in a lot of ways. When you think about other competing criminal industries, such as gun running and drug running, one of the reasons why human trafficking is growing so quickly is because you can sell a human being over and over and over again, multiple times a day, every day, weeks and years on end. So it's actually a commodity, a supply that doesn't go away if you sell it. So all different types of criminal industry people who work in those areas are identifying that this is a really profitable area. So we expect human trafficking to actually be one on probably in the next 5 years. Now, to bring that home a little bit, since 2013, which is Shortly after the Safe Harbor law was passed in Kentucky, we therefore started tracking child trafficking cases through the Department of Community Services, DCPS, our state child welfare system. Kentucky has received 787 reported incidents of child trafficking, and that includes 949 alleged child victims. How many of you are surprised by that number? That seems high to you? Absolutely. That seems very high to me when I thought. The majority, when we look at those reported cases of child trafficking, the majority originates from Louisville, and about a little over 2/3 involve girls 13 years and up. And in 59% of the reports, a parent or caregiver was actually identified as the trafficker. To bring this closer to home, and I'm going to go to the next slide in a minute, but I'm holding off a little on purpose. We actually wanted to conduct a study about the prevalence of sex trafficking in our community. So about 2 years ago, the Human Trafficking Research Initiative launched the YES study. Some of you may have heard it. YES stands for Youth Experiences Survey. And we surveyed youth experiencing homelessness within Louisville and southern Indiana, so Kentuckiana region. And we collected 132 completed surveys from youth aged 12 to 25. This was during a 2-week period, and we accessed them through about 8 different agency community partners who were already serving homeless or monthly for young people around. What do you think we found was the prevalence rate for those who haven't read that? Prevalence of sex trafficking among young people aged 20 or 12 to 25 who were experiencing.
Very high, I would imagine.
Very high? Wait.
Yeah.
75%?
90%.
Oh, okay. Okay. That is really high. We did not find a percentage that high. What I will tell you is that prior to this study, somewhat similar research that was conducted out of New Orleans found a 21 to 25, 26% rate, but those were conducted in face-to-face. We used an anonymous survey that could actually be placed into a locked box, so there wasn't a person interviewing the participant, the young person. So it was 100% confidential when they were doing that. I really had confidence. In Arizona, where they first designed the initial YES survey, they found over the 4 years that they conducted that survey about a 30 to 34%. And they used a similar method. So we were looking at about 30%, because we actually thought Arizona might be higher for various reasons around how long it's been addressing trafficking. They're also a former state, so there were some assumptions made. In actuality, we found about a 41% prevalence rate in our community. So it's actually the highest prevalence rate that's been found currently in the nation when talking with this specific patient. So just to back up for a second, again, this isn't a training on human trafficking, I think it's really important to point out how we legally define trafficking. How many of you are already aware what the law says, the federal law and the state law around it? Okay, so we operationalized sex trafficking by asking these 3 questions, and if the participants replied yes to any of them, then they were included in yes, I've experienced sex trafficking, that category. So federally, anytime someone is sold or exchanged for a commercial good, and they are under 18, and there's an exchange for sex or labor, that's considered trafficking. So there's no such thing as a child prostitute. It's actually a hashtag national. No such thing as a child prostitute. So in the United States, if you're under 18, even if you are a 16-year-old standing on the street corner and selling yourself, that is considered sex trafficking for the federal law. Now, if you're 18 or older, force, fraud, or coercion also needs to take place as part of that experience in order for it to be considered trafficking. But if you're under 18, we do not need to prove that forced fraud or coercion is occurring. Simply selling a child for sex is illegal. Okay. Which seems like it should make sense. But actually that law changed. It changed less than a decade ago. So up until in Kentucky, the Safe Harbor law going into place in about 2012, if a young person was caught selling themselves for sex, even if there was a trafficker involved, guess who was arrested? Even if there was a trafficker and a buyer involved, the child. Yes, absolutely. But now with our laws, that has changed significantly, although we're still working on how that is implemented. It's a challenge for training. And also, making sure that we have services available. We aren't placing young attention for where can they go to receive specialized services. So that is actually a really complex issue that different jurisdictions in our state grapple. But this is how we define it. And so I want to point out that at the time when we implemented the survey, it's still somewhat early on in how this law is being interpreted. So we actually use the highest threshold for both, because we talk with 12 to 25-year-olds. So we actually use this higher threshold of forced fraud and coercion to include any of our young people in sex trafficking. So they're all meeting the adult threshold here. So we included 41%. If we went back now and did this, we would probably do it differently. But I just wanted to point out what that's from. So also then, when we look at the data, it tells us that in our sample, about 1 in every 2 females and 1 in every males is having sex trafficking. The average age of the first sex trafficking experience was about 16. That's higher than you would hear in some national statistics, but is actually what we have found also in Arizona using this similar approach to surveying people. So then we can talk a little bit about why we might see some differences there, but some of this actually just simply based on the methods or and how they're asking questions. Interestingly, 76% reported having a sex trafficker at the time of the survey. And about 1/3 said they were actually being sex trafficked at the time when they were taking the survey. So this is when they were at home with the innocence receiving services, or at YMCA Safe Place receiving services. They actually were trafficked potentially in that day. And then the reason for trafficking was primarily for money, but also you'll see that almost half the time it was for a place to stay, and then also for drugs. And what's, I think, important to note is that the place to stay is a pretty close runner to money. So when we looked at this data, some of the first groups that really paid attention were those who serve homeless and runaway youth and or who are looking at providing or enhancing the system of care for runaway youth. Because if we can provide them shelter, if they're not then vulnerable in that way, potentially prevent them from experiencing sex. Good question?
So I think it's just a clarification. You just said that if you go back to the slide, bullet point second from bottom. When they were taking this survey, they were being trafficked, but they were at a YMCA or a safe place or something. So people in those systems are trafficking? What is?
No, not necessarily. So that's why I made this vote. Within that day or within those few days while they were there, they had a trafficker expecting them back, or they were being sold. So if they were coming in for a drop-in center, they were returning back to a trafficking situation that night.
So these places are not like a sanctuary trying to protect them. These are just transitional homes.
Most of the services we provide for homeless or for individuals who are experiencing homelessness or runaway are not locked facilities, so they can come and go as they may need to. And these young people in particular tend to move around quite a bit. In fact, if they are approached with quote unquote traditional services, they may actually run away from services. So one of the challenges that we've been working with partners on is how do you engage these who are challenged because they don't feel safe, it takes a long time to build trust, and they may think that they're in trouble. Or they may not even recognize that they could be a victim. That might be their boyfriend, who they love, who is taking much better care of them than their family did. So there are a lot of challenges even in how they may view the situation.
Is that an example of fraud? You mentioned forced fraud. Like when the boyfriend is, I don't understand the fraud is.
Sure. So someone could misrepresent the reason why they are coming to live with them or work with them, or they might make some promises that they're going to employ them in a certain way, but actually the expectation is the exchange for sex. I also just want to give the caveat that our study and a lot of my work does focus on sex trafficking, but labor trafficking most certainly is also in the United States and definitely. But for purposes of today's discussion, a lot about specific to sex trafficking, and those are the questions that we ask young people. So just another piece of information. When we asked about whether or not technology was used for the purpose of sex trafficking, 7% of those who reported being sex trafficked said it was. Now, I have other information, more detailed information about this in our guest report, but you would see then, when we detail out how it's being used, and if it's being used to recruit or sell them, what's being used, and the most common tool is through social media apps. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. At one point, the website Backpage.com was a platform for selling young people in general, primarily for sex. If you aren't aware of Backpage.com and its role in selling children throughout the United States for sex, I strongly recommend viewing the documentary called I Am Jane Doe. It's available on Netflix, and it actually does a wonderful job of outlining the legal battle that various advocates and champions had to engage in to finally change the law at the federal level so that they would no longer protect themselves. So technology plays a big role, and with the additional detailed information we have, yes, we know which types of technology and how the type of role they're playing, and so we actually now also include the information when we're educating parents and young people about how to stay safe online. One of the other pieces that we looked at that was new, that we added into the yes survey, was ACEs, or Adverse Child Experiences. In Arizona, up to that point, they had not included those. A lot of my background is in trauma-informed care and trauma work, so I was very interested in looking at the role that ACEs may play, and also just descriptively what kind of ACEs and what's the prevalence of ACEs among young. So first, before we even look at this piece, we found that the percentage of young people who had 4 or more ACEs in the sample as a whole, no surprise, was many times greater than kind of what we consider the national average based on the CDC Kaiser study. However, when we then looked at ACEs of the young people experiencing homelessness who weren't sex trafficked and those who reported being sex trafficked, the percentage that had 7 or more ACEs was double. So out of 10 ACEs, that's checking yes to 7 or more ACEs. That's a tremendous trauma load on an individual. And also really pointed to the need for trauma-informed specialized services, which of course then really kind of dig down and say, okay, we need to do a better job of just initially identifying for these experiences. So some of that information has already gone out. We've been working on it. We've been pilot testing a trauma-informed. But when we look at specific types of ACEs of the 10, These 4 were found to be the most predictive of potentially a young person sex trafficked, having a increased risk factor. So sexual abuse is not a surprise. In a lot of the literature, we already see that individuals who experience sex trafficking oftentimes do have some sort of history of sexual abuse or sexual violence. The other pieces, though, are interesting to really think about. So domestic abuse of the mother, these are actually taken directly from the ICSIS survey. So there are, of course, other things we'd be interested in asking, just so we stuck with the categories that the ICSIS gave us. So domestic abuse of the mother. If the child had experienced that in the home before they're 18, then they were likely to experience shock. Emotional abuse, 2.5, and the physical neglect, 2.2. So when you see those separately laid out, they kind of make sense, because what is that doing to the child? If they've had these, if they've had all 4 of these experiences.
They're emotionally vulnerable.
They're emotionally vulnerable. And key word, vulnerable. These are setting young people up to be very, very vulnerable to someone who's really has expertise in recruiting and grooming young people for the purposes of eventually selling them and giving them profit. Absolutely. The other piece that we found that was really important to look at was around suicide. So again, keep in mind, this data just comes from young people we talked to in our, within that 132 sample. So we have a really wonderful faculty for Dr. Moore, who does a lot of work on suicide risk and circumstances of suicide disclosure. And she actually added additional questions into this. So we built on the Arizona as well. And when we look at suicide risk, we found that for those young people who experience sex trafficking, they were 4 times more likely for ideation, 5 times more likely to actually have an attempt in their history. Ideation was actually linked to technology. When technology was used for equipment. There are some interesting thoughts around that piece. And then the involvement of technology is associated with over 7 times higher odds of experiencing suicidal ideation. So this role that technology plays really has a potential as well. This piece of information we also shared back to our community partners, who then immediately started talking about what are they doing to identify potential, so who may be at risk. Were they actually also screened for suicide as well? And so Dr. Fry made some recommendations for the screening specific as well. So a lot of this information started to come back to. So I lay that out because I want to be really clear then where we started with this project STAAR. Our purpose, knowing that these types of experiences were happening to young people in our community, was really to help raise awareness in our. But we also wanted to help educate systems with the ultimate goal of reducing stigma around this issue and then promoting resilience in the survivors themselves. So we used Photovoice. How many of you are familiar with Photovoice? Wonderful, okay. And because I don't want to take too much time, I'm happy to share more information offline about specifically about our methods. But one of the pieces that I'm sharing on this slide is that we actually gave the participants in our sample, so we partnered with community partners at those 2 locations, Christie Love Mission Center for Women and Families, developed 2 cohorts of women, it ended up being women, all women who identified as a survivor of childhood sex trafficking. And in both cohorts, we gave them a card, a laminated card, that they could take with them. So after we trained them in Photovoice methods and how to take pictures and talk to them about the project, and they participated in informed consent, we ended up giving them just 1 word each week. And those words are on the bottom of that darker blue card. So the words for each week, one was identity, sexuality, power, technology, transportation, and transformation. And so each week, The participants went out into the community, took photos, and they all ended up using their phones that they were doing. They would submit those photos back to us electronically. We would print them out for them. And then the next week when they came back, we would spread them all out on a table and sit around and talk to them about why they took those photos, what they meant to them, what the message was, and then listen really to the conversation. That secondary component is how other participants reacted when they saw and heard about other photos was just as powerful as the initial. Like I still get goosebumps at how they really identify with one another and how they share their experiences. So the film itself, and I can talk a little bit afterwards with some more detailed questions. I'd like to show the film itself is 22 minutes in total, but it's really 22 minutes of the film and then there's some credits. It's composed of the photos that the artists took. So all of the artists are survivors of childhood sex trafficking, and also their narratives. So remember when I said they came back, talked about the photos, we recorded all of that, their consent, transcribed that, and then actually went through and coded that data. And we're now coding it with a different lens, but at the time we coded it looking specifically for narratives that all show those. So what I would like to say, and what we would always say, is that we have a disclaimer that the images, particularly on the front end of the film, and the narratives could cause them distress or upset. This is a project also about sex trafficking. So initially there are some photos that can be emotionally triggering or just cause some sort of emotional, and that's okay. The survivors are hoping that you will connect with their experience so they're going to raise about this issue. And definitely we don't show this film to young children, so we just want to advise that. And there are no young children in this room, so we're good to go. But when we share this film in other settings, we are really careful about how we share it. If anyone feels triggered or needs to step out, please feel free. We will support you doing that. Also know that the way that we and students play the film out in order, it really does build, I think, towards more resilience to subject and sit through and take it in. That would be great. And then also, they wanted the film to be shown in silence. Because in other Photovoice projects, when you see them displayed digitally, you might actually hear music in the background or a voiceover. When we tried that, they felt like it really distorted their message. So that was one reason that we kept it silent. The second is there is really something, and I think you'll experience too, that just sitting and reflecting on what you're seeing, really kind of sitting thoughts with it and waiting to hear anything else or process anything else into that. So it potentially may have more of an impact, particularly on community audiences. So I'll be curious about your experience. Okay, so we're ready to show the film.
Yeah, center one. Yeah. Yeah.
So with the time we have remaining, I actually would, if it's okay with you, spend that reflecting, hearing back. I do have included in the PowerPoint presentation information about our next steps, data analysis, as well as next steps for sharing the film. And we have some pretty detailed methods that we're engaging in right now for that next stage analysis. And then also the number of thematic groups that we're working with. And then also some outreach and advocacy efforts that currently underway. So I just wanted to let you know that information. But I'd like to go back and have a meeting and hear from you. What were your reactions to the film? How did it impact the way you think about survivors of child
to go first. For adults, it's very powerful tool, but it's the children. In educating them is more important than educating adults, in my. So, what do you have in children that they are educated with, threatened by teaching them, but I want there to be a version to teach a child.
The comment is that it's really the children who need to see this,
Yes.
not just adults. In fact, they're more. And I would say, first of all, I love that you said that, and we absolutely agree. And actually, the survivors at the end of each of the meetings are spent essentially talking about how they want their message shared, what way they want to receive this information, and overwhelmingly, all of them said they feel like children should receive this information. And when we started initially talking with them about that, what that would look like, we assumed they meant high school age. But they very quickly corrected us and said, actually, a lot of the vulnerabilities that led up to me being trafficked, and in some cases, for some of them, actually being exploited and trafficked, those incidents started when they were in middle school. So they were really firm with us that they want us to approach middle school age, young and up. And actually, they want them to see this film. So one of the things that we've developed in conjunction with JCPS and an advocate from the Center for Women and Families is a viewing guide for young people to watch the film. The feedback we've received is that the young people can actually handle what sometimes we give them credit for, right? And that this is really information that to see and talk about. Because again, the survivor said if someone was talking to me about some of these things, someone was acknowledging that self-directed harm occurs, suicidal ideation, these types of fears and experiences could happen and be happening to us, then if someone had actually opened up that conversation, they feel like they would have potentially taken a different trajectory in their lives, which is really powerful here. So they were actually the ones who pushed us to actually start younger when we thought about do this. So those are two groups that we work with to develop viewing guides, but we're very open to suggestions and opportunities to share this with them really anywhere throughout the state. So if you have any ideas or information or thoughts about that, we will work with them. With the viewing guide, we do ask that a trained facilitator be part of the process of bring film, facilitate a conversation afterwards, and also show it with care, with that disclaimer, and really to prepare to watch. And then also we have made a recommendation to JCPS that potentially it accompanies actual human trafficking training component. So that's something that we're thinking about and talking about, and they're really trying to talk through that would best fit their program.
Do we have any schedule for when they may be implementing any of this?
Do we have a what? A
Schedule.
Oh, a schedule. Well, that's a really good question. We met with them about 1 to 2 months ago, and then they sent us away to work on the viewing guide. So my hope is that we could start showing this. I actually have some schools who are interested in showing this next month to time it with the Kentucky Derby Week, because there is an increase in trafficking and selling people during Derby, although it happens 360 days out of year, 24/7 in all community schools. But there is a spike. So there are some specific schools that are interested in showing this today. Otherwise, we think that because there needs to be some training and collaboration then between those who provide the company training curriculum on it, that most likely we would fully launch it in the fall. We'll start next year. So that's the best time frame I can offer now, but if you have contacts at JCPS or ideas or suggestions, welcome them. Again, other places where young people do it. The survivors would absolutely love that. Because that is what they would define as where they see vision. So thank you.
Yeah, so April is Child Abuse Month, right? right? So that would be a good time.
And also, I think that, rather than giving these trainings in May when Derby is actually going, having this information before that.
Absolutely. So you mentioned April, Child Abuse Awareness Month. It also has youth violence awareness mentioned. So the timing of it, I think, is really important. I think this year, because of when this we're coming to the academic schedule for the school district, that I like your suggestion that we actually should have much sooner. And if you have any specific time periods that we open that. It's also a partnership, so it would be a curriculum there, which classroom, which setting we want to share this.
Just to represent another side, I really appreciate this for adults. I think that if more adults were exposed to this and the stigma was reduced, part of what you see young people is when they're happening is that they expect adults to be like, or really pitying, or really amped up in a way that we can't handle. And so I think it makes young people feel like if they can actually say, I've been cutting, or I've been trafficked, if they know that the adults around them culturally can handle hearing that. And so we have to be exposed to things as adults in order for children to know who to talk to, even if they've been exposed to this, which is a good idea. If they then go talk to an adult, the adult is like, can't handle the information, then we've sort of screwed up before they had a chance. But I would say, like, I also love the idea of sharing this. I wanted to ask, like, are the survivors committed to this film version of their work when they think about sharing it with middle schoolers, or are they more like, we want the stories to be shared? So I can imagine there could be a way to make it all of the emotion of it, but a little bit safer. It was tailored artistic for, for audience. Not safer, not that this isn't safe, but just a little bit. So I was just curious about that.
Yes, they're open to different options to have share their stories as well as their photos. So they actually talk about a billboard campaign featuring maybe one photo each month with narrative resources. They also talk about having us work with another to create like larger than postcard size, a thicker handout form, handout sheets that could be utilized by different individuals who are doing outreach, and they could have the photo and the narrative on one piece, so the advocacy and art message, so it really connects that person to this person who's reaching out to me, and then on the back side has resources. If they know something. So that's something that some of our survivor-led organizations are interested in. So we're looking at additional grants, to help fund some of the supplies, as well as the billboard idea. They also suggested us looking at images in the TARP buses, because they talked about while they felt like the TARP bus was a huge asset for them, right? It gave them freedom about film. There are also others who talked about now being hyper aware, seeing when they know trafficking is around them, and one of those places is when they ride on the bus, they can observe and know that it's actually happening there in front of them without being fully aware. But I welcome other ideas about how to display or share that may not be on that specific for young people.
I want to say, so Tasha, I really appreciate your comment, because I think that this is relevant across layers of identity. And I also appreciate, as you were flipping through your slide, I saw pragmatism. And so I just want to appreciate your intentional and explicit incorporation of words as they relate to philosophy and ideology, and as they relate and apply to our research, because I think many times, especially in academic settings, we don't talk about those things to the extent that they translate to liberation and they allow us to engage in power analysis. Because as evidenced by some of the participants, right, those were some of the life dynamics that they were interested in, right? Power, money. Money is associated to capitalism, right? So we start analyzing those types of root causes and social determinants of health, right? Colonization, capitalism, the isms, these systems of power. Then that allows us to, as you mentioned, Tasha, like how do we as adults with so much power in the world begin to create and cultivate something that's safer and responsible for all populations. Just the way that you're translating this and formulating partnerships that are actual in nature, I might applaud that. And I also want to ask, are there opportunities for the participants to engage in leading from an employment perspective aspects of the research?
So thank you for your comments. We definitely we have an opportunity to dig even deeper into all of the data. There's so much more than even what's seen today in what the discussions and the isms and the issues that they talk about, the root causes of this social issue. And but to jump to your other question, at the time, the only opportunity that we were able to fund through our project was to pay the survivor leaders a stipend to then help with the project. So it was participatory in that they met with us for up to a year before we began implementing the Photovoice groups to help us design the questions, the way that we would ask the questions, the words, the 6 words of the week. They informed those, as well as some research. We also informed, theory informed why we included those words. And then as we were recruiting, they were actually the primary recruiters for survivors of childhood sex trafficking. Because identifying, as you can imagine, this group is really challenging, as we talked about earlier. So it really, we really leaned on them to help with that piece. So we weren't outing people as they were starting in the group discussion. And then they actually sat in on and participated in the group. So that if someone did have a reaction to the conversation, there was someone there that they already knew that could support them. And then also just really to help make sure that the environment, because in some cases this was actually took place in a residential setting where programming was happening around us. So then they were also there just to kind of protect that environment, make sure it was quiet and confidential, felt safe, especially. So they were paid, the survivor leaders were paid as part of the project as subcontractors through the University of Seoul. In the future, we have talked about how we can hire additional survivors to work with us. There are some challenges in doing that through the university for reasons that I could talk more about that really represent, I think, social justice issues. So we're still trying to work that out because we have future levels of this project and directions we'd like to go, but we have to figure out how to overcome some of the barriers. For example, almost all of the women have a basic threat. There are basic requirements through HR at the university that sometimes serve as a barrier for us to hire individuals. So one of the thoughts we've talked about is actually partnering with a community agency who can overcome those barriers more quickly than perhaps we can at the university level, and then we would contract them to hire, and then we would still train and support them and include them in this project or in other projects like this. The Photovoice method and the way that we approach this will really way to take to other forms of community violence, to engage particularly youth, adolescents who are experiencing violence for other research projects. But I think that's, you raise a really important piece. Survivor leaders around the country would recommend that if you write a grant and you're including survivors in your research project, they be paid just as much as any consultant. So when I, absolutely. So when I write, for example, Angela Renfro, the director of the Christine Love Foundation, into a grant, we pay her $100 an hour for her services. Interestingly, through the consortium's grant, some of you may know this who have grants, they, by year 2, actually limited the total amount that we pay our food partner to 200 and total.
And so who is limiting that?
The university consortium for social justice, for transdisciplinary social justice research.
How ironic. I know that.
So, and it's definitely something we talked with them about. So we have looked at other ways to help compensate our expert. When we present this to the community, Angela oftentimes co-presents with me. And so we also, naturally, there is a question of how can we help. And so in addition to how to respond, how to create more awareness, how to tell others in your community, we also talk about getting involved, whether it's a volunteer or a donating to your local survivor-led organizations such as Christy Love. And so we also have been able to connect Angela with additional resources that way. So we had to be creative because of that barrier. So we're almost done. We'll take one more question and then wrap up.
Do you have a list of trainings that are available to identify?
Like a human trafficking 101 training. There are, so I co-chair the Louisville Metro Human Trafficking Task Force, and there are several community partners that provide trainings. So I could, if I got your information, I could put you in touch with them, and then you could see what their schedules look like.
On the website also?
There actually isn't. We have the Louisville Metro Human Trafficking Task Force has a Facebook page, but not an official website that's being updated, which is a great idea, something we will strive for. But in the meantime, if I have your information or at our next meeting, I can bring that back to you. But if you email me at jennifer.middleton@google.com, I can get you that information. And it depends on your audience. So I actually think it's nice to kind of choose who you might want to have come provide training.
I would imagine that there are, among our student body, there are students who have been trafficked.
Yes.
Faculty and graduate assistant, teaching assistants, it's good to hear potentially those who might be at risk.
Yes, absolutely, they are at risk. There are a lot of vulnerabilities that our students have, as you don't know. Also, they could be currently being trafficked. Dr. Teresa Hayden, who was teaching justice until she was June, she taught the human trafficking course in that department and actually talks about different classes where at least one or two of the individuals in the class weren't aware this is what happened to them until they started learning about it, and then actually approached her after class or followed up with her and said, I didn't even know that what this was human trafficking. What it do. So while this is a really emotionally charged and heavy topic and a really large social issue, many causes that we need to address it to rid our community of trafficking. I think one of the big hopes and one of the pieces that I love about this work is just simply educating and creating awareness in the community and among partners and educators, and young people and parents can make a difference. It can actually prevent it happening or intervene very early on or before someone gets to the point where they've gone down a different path. All right, so we are way out of time. Thank you for your patience and your consideration in viewing the film. The survivors appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.